Thank you very much. Good evening, good morning to the rest of you, and good afternoon. My name is Max Makuvise, and I'm sure that most of you already read my biography. And for those that haven't, I don't think that you're going to miss out on much. If we could possibly put the slides up on the screen, thank you very much. Um, Basically, in tackling this topic, I'd like to focus my attention on the African continent, which is currently home to at least 20% of the world's cattle population, according to FAO stat. My argument is that the solution is not in reducing the number of cattle, but in managing them. I'm going to talk about the benefits of protein. And when we talk about the benefits of protein, I'd like to look at the issue from three angles. The first of which is cattle managed correctly will empower farmers to improve their livelihoods, to sell when they want to, and have reduced poverty. This may sound very far-fetched, but we have cases of small-scale farmers in this country in particular being arrested for theft, but they have 80, that's right, 80 cattle in their kraal, but they plead poverty. Secondly, healthy populations will be achieved through increased intake of protein by the people. More details on this will follow later in the presentation. And the third angle is, by working on education and genetics, we can reduce the methane emissions of cattle, which are some of the highest in the world, and this will lead to a greener planet and bring us in line with the developed world. Next slide, please. At the heart of all this is commercializing our small-scale rural farmers on the continent. As I stated in the introduction, we have 20% of the global cattle population. However, we contribute virtually nothing to global meat consumption, including on our own continent. I have two interesting personal cases which will express some of the problems that we have. I was approached a few years ago to do a cattle project in Congo, Brazzaville, because the majority of their beef in the hotels and restaurants was imported from France. On the other side of the continent, although this was way back in 2006, on a visit to Zambia, we were told that the beef in the hotel was from South Africa, notwithstanding the fact that Tanzania has the third highest cattle population in Africa, which is approximately 1.8% of the global cattle population, according to figures from FAO stat. The African cattle industry mainly revolves around the smallholder farmer, with average herd sizes of 5 to 12. Please note that this is an average, as there are some farmers with larger herds, but there is actually very little difference in their current management practices. So the chap with 5 or the lady with 80 are managing their cattle in basically the same fashion within their countries. As I see things, it is important to note that we have been left behind by the world and seem to suffer from donor dependency. If the West throws food at us, we'll take it. We don't have to worry about improving our own livelihoods, being part of the global value chain, or improving our cattle. This historical disadvantage stems at the beginning from some, dare I say, colonial practices which have not actively been dealt with as we move towards the end of the first quarter of the 21st century. So from as early as the 1930s in Zimbabwe, there's been discrimination against the smallholder farmer, and he's purposely been left out of being commercialized. Most of the cattle we have in Africa are kept as idle assets, and very few used for draft power or for other cultural purposes, such as the bride price. Move on to the next slide, please. Health and welfare, an interesting one. If you look at the graph on the right of this slide, you can see that protein consumption in Southern Africa in 2017 falls slightly above the recommended daily allowance of 56. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to say how many grams, whether it's grams or whatever, but I'll say 56. This is where I think we need to look further into this, because RDA in most cases relates to the minimum quantities that should be consumed as opposed to a healthy amount. These countries are more middle class than other countries in Southern Africa, including Mozambique, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, who, if data was available, might fall below this line. With our abundance of cattle, it makes sense that through commercializing our livestock operations on the continent at household level, the protein intake can be increased to healthier levels. I stand to be corrected, but I'm not sure that there is a maximum level of protein that we as individuals can intake from animal source proteins. Another issue that could be resolved through increasing meat intake is the reduction in highly refined carbohydrates, maize, also known as corn in the Americas, bread and rice. I normally refer to this as the independence disease, As countries strive to achieve middle-income status, they increase their consumption of highly refined carbohydrates, which has seen an increase in metabolic illnesses. It's estimated that 25% of adults in sub-Saharan Africa have metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, that isn't as widely recognized as it should be. Move on to the next slide, please. When we talk about protein, we need to differentiate between animal sourced and non-animal sourced. This comes from a friend of mine, Dr. Peter Pellisted, who I met in Chicago 2 years ago, and I normally spend a lot of time talking to about protein. Even though he's a forage scientist, we tend to start at the other end of the scale. Beef and dairy and other animal source foods are superior sources of protein as compared to plant-sourced foods, and they are also superior sources of other nutrients and the exclusive sources of several essential nutrients. I was doing a bit of research earlier on, and basically in doing that, discovered that certain things like, I think it's called heme iron, is only available in red meats, and that helps absorb the iron in plants. The nutrient content in animal source foods is also more consistent than plant source foods. And I think as a producer, I see that in hay quality. If you cut your hay at one time of the year, there's a higher protein content than another time of the year, and also depending on where you are within a country. I think let's look at a bit of an example. We've gotten to a point where the FCDO, formerly DFID, was an arm of that. They're promoting biofortified maize to be grown in Zimbabwe because of the severe vitamin deficiencies coming from the use of highly refined carbohydrates. The vitamin in this particular case is vitamin A. An alternative good source of that same vitamin is milk, cheese, and eggs. Next slide, please. I think I changed the earlier slide. Sorry to the non-all black fans. Sorry, there was supposed to be a piece of meat as opposed to me eating a burger. A greener planet. Holistic managers normally talk about the movements of the bison and the wildebeest hundreds of years ago. And I'm not saying that that is how we should be herding our animals, although I do believe in a certain amount of holistic approach towards management practices of your cattle. But we have to save our pastures and we need to manage them better. A lot more research is needed into this. And I'm talking from an African context. And this is somewhere where we as Africans can benefit from the studies already done in other parts of the world. Too many times we ask for money, we ask for certain projects to be done. But I think the first point is to give us the information that you guys have already gleaned through all your research over the years. Within cattle and range management is the topic of carbon sinks, but I'm not going to go into that because I'm not qualified to talk on it. But I think it is something which I'm sure somebody will discuss at some point during the lightning round. By improving the genetics through selection of indigenous African cattle, we can create a situation where our methane emissions on the continent are reduced significantly. I say indigenous cattle because it's important that we do not replace our breed with popular exotics that have gone through a selection process already. A perfect example of this would be the indigenous animals going through the selection process in Zimbabwe are our tuli, sorry. Our tulis have been exported to Australia and the United States. Next slide, please. And the solution is, as I like to see it, is based on a conception to consumption model revolving around the smallholder farm, and that is specifically for Africa. Some say it's a game changer, but I think it's more about polishing the wheel as opposed to reinventing it. Here we go. Farmers need to know the value of their cattle, that they can be commercialized, that they are part of the value chain, and need to recognize their own importance. They need to be trained in primary animal health care, disease detection, and resource management with an emphasis on climate change. Times, as we say, are changing, and we need our farmers to be able to adapt. Resilience is key, but with this training also goes the need to make sure they have access to animal health products and other inputs to enable them to make use of their newfound skills. This means the ability to purchase through outlets and not freebies. They need access to improved indigenous genetics through bulls and artificial insemination, which can result in better feed efficiency and reducing our carbon footprint. And when they're ready to sell their steers, we need to make sure that the market is brought to them through auctions, not to be victims of unscrupulous traders that offer them as little as 10% of the market value of their animals when they take them to the abattoirs by themselves. Bringing this all together, for us to evaluate our successes, we need tech, especially when it comes to traceability. And there's a groundbreaking app which will be launched in the next few weeks to help the small-scale farmer, and it runs on blockchain technology in partnership with one of the world's leading payment transaction companies, which is also helping through financial inclusion of the smallholder farmer. There'll be more information about this on the breakout session that I'll be part of. Next slide, please. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I know it was short and I packed a great deal in, but I feel change is in the air. Thank you very much.